The dimly lit restaurant in Manhattan buzzed with quiet sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections onto the polished marble floors, while the scent of roasted lamb and fresh-baked bread lingered in the air. At a corner table, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, Liam Carter sat alone, stirring his whiskey absent-mindedly. He wasn't in the mood to be here. A high-profile business conference had ended hours ago, and his colleagues had moved on to after-parties and networking events. But Liam had no interest in rubbing shoulders with men in overpriced suits who only saw him as a walking investment opportunity. Instead, he had come here, to this quiet, upscale restaurant where he could disappear into the background. But then he saw her. She moved gracefully between the tables, balancing a tray with practiced ease. Her dark brown hair was neatly tied back, revealing sharp cheekbones and warm, amber eyes. Unlike the other waitstaff, who carried polite, rehearsed smiles, she had something different about her, an air of quiet self-assurance, a confidence that didn't come from servitude but from something deeper. Liam wasn't the type to notice waitresses. He had met models, actresses, women from prestigious families, all eager to be in his presence. But none of them had caught his attention the way this woman did. There was something inexplicably intriguing about her. The name on her badge read Sophia Moreno. "Good evening, sir. Have you decided what you'd like to order?" Her voice was smooth, professional, with a slight huskiness that made Liam pause. He looked up, locking eyes with her for the first time. She didn't react. No flash of recognition, no widened eyes at seeing Liam Carter, the youngest self-made millionaire in the city. For the first time in years, someone was looking at him not as a billionaire, but as just a man. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "I'll take the chef's special," he said, deliberately stalling to see if she would acknowledge him. Sophia simply nodded, scribbling his order. "Would you like a wine pairing with that?" Liam leaned back slightly. Still nothing. Either she was an incredible actress, or she genuinely had no idea who he was. "Surprise me," he said, watching for a flicker of reaction. Still, she remained impassive, offering only a professional nod before turning away. Liam's smirk faded as he watched her disappear toward the kitchen. He wasn't sure why, but for the first time in years, he felt unseen, and he didn't like it. Across the restaurant, at the server's station, Jessica Hayes, Sophia's co-worker and best friend, nudged her. "You do know who that is, right?" Sophia glanced at the receipt in her hand. Liam Carter. The name was familiar, but she didn't let herself react. "I don't care," she murmured, keeping her expression neutral. Jessica scoffed. "Oh, come on, Sophia. He's practically a legend in the tech world. Built his empire from nothing. He's also ridiculously rich and ridiculously single." Sophia exhaled, keeping her back straight as she reached for a bottle of wine. "I'm not interested in tech moguls," she said, more to herself than to Jessica, because she knew exactly who Liam Carter was. And that was precisely the problem. Liam tapped his fingers against the table, his gaze flickering toward the server's station where Sophia stood, pouring a glass of wine with practiced ease. She didn't look his way once, but he noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her focus strictly on her task. It intrigued him. Most women he encountered would have tried to impress him by now, dropping hints about their ambitions, laughing a little too hard at his jokes, fishing for an invitation to one of his elite events. But Sophia, she was different. She was keeping her distance, and Liam wasn't sure if it was deliberate or just who she was. Either way, It made him want to unravel her even more. When she returned with his meal, he leaned forward slightly. "You didn't ask," he said. Sophia paused, arching an eyebrow as she set down his plate. "Ask what?" "If I wanted the steak rare or medium." She didn't miss a beat. "The chef's special is always medium rare. If you wanted it differently, you would have said so." Liam's lips curved into a smile. "Efficient. I like that." Sophia didn't respond, simply stepping back with the same polite expression she had maintained since the moment she approached his table. But something flickered in her eyes, something guarded. Liam took a slow sip of his wine, watching as she moved onto another table, engaging with customers effortlessly. She was comfortable here, that much was clear. But there was something about her that didn't quite fit, a sharpness in her gaze, an awareness that went beyond the usual detached politeness of a server. He didn't understand why, but he suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to know more about her. Before he could dwell on the thought, a familiar voice broke his focus. "Well, well, the great Liam Carter dining alone?" Liam looked up to see Ethan Parker, his closest friend and business partner, sliding into the seat across from him. Unlike Liam, who preferred tailored, classic suits, Ethan had a more casual approach, his blazer unbuttoned, his dark hair slightly tousled. "Didn't expect to find you here," Ethan continued, signaling a waiter for his own drink. "Figured you'd be drowning in champagne at some post-conference party." Liam smirked, picking up his fork. "You know I hate those things." Ethan leaned back, his gaze drifting toward the servers. His eyes landed on Sophia, who was refilling another customer's glass. "Ah," he mused, a knowing grin forming. "Now I see why you're here." Liam didn't react, but Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, man, I know that look. You've got a new puzzle to solve, don't you?" Liam exhaled, pushing his plate slightly to the side. "She's different." "Or maybe," Ethan said, raising an eyebrow, "she just doesn't care who you are." That was exactly the thought that had been gnawing at Liam's mind. But why? Sophia finally turned toward their table, approaching with effortless grace. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" she asked, her gaze flickering between them. Ethan smiled charmingly. "Just some information, actually." "How long have you been working here?" Sophia's eyes met his with a quiet confidence. "A while." Liam narrowed his gaze. That wasn't an answer. Ethan chuckled. "Not one for small talk, huh?" "I prefer efficiency," she replied smoothly. Liam watched her, intrigued. He had spent years mastering the art of reading people, negotiating with billionaires, identifying hidden agendas, detecting false humility. But Sophia was a blank slate, and that, more than anything, made him want to understand her. As she turned to leave, Liam called out, "Sophia!" For the first time, she hesitated before looking back. Liam tilted his head, studying her. "I'll be back." There it was, a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, not annoyance, something else. Sophia didn't respond, but as she walked away, her fingers tightened slightly around her tray. She already knew Liam Carter would come back, and she wasn't sure if that terrified her, or if it was exactly what she had been expecting. Liam had been watching people for years, clients, competitors, investors. He had built an empire by reading the subtle shifts in body language, the flicker of hesitation, the micro-expressions that revealed what people weren't saying. But Sophia Moreno? She was a mystery. When she returned with his meal, she placed the dish down with a careful precision that came from experience. Not once did she linger. Not once did she fumble with her words. She was too composed, too steady. "You're good at this," Liam commented, picking up his fork. Sophia barely glanced at him. "It's my job. And yet, you don't seem to enjoy it." This time, her fingers tensed around the edge of the tray before she could stop herself. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Liam caught it. She straightened. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mr. Carter?" The use of his name wasn't lost on him, so she did know who he was. Liam set his fork down, leaning forward slightly. "You recognize me?" Sophia hesitated for half a second before responding. A little hard not to. Her voice was even, unreadable. But the fact that she hadn't acknowledged it earlier meant she had chosen to ignore it, and that intrigued him even more. "Yet you're not impressed." Sophia exhaled through her nose, almost amused. "Should I be?" Liam smirked. "Most people are." "That sounds exhausting." He blinked. That was not the response he had expected. For years, people had treated him as either an idol to be worshipped or a prize to be won. Women either threw themselves at him or played mind games to make him chase them. But Sophia, she wasn't playing at all, and that made her dangerous. Liam tilted his head, studying her. "I take it you're not a fan of the tech world?" Sophia hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she had too many. There was a time when she had been deeply involved in it, a time when tech startups and innovation had been a part of her daily life, when she had sat in boardrooms and listened to industry leaders discuss the future of education. But that life was gone, and Liam Carter was one of the reasons why. Sophia forced a neutral smile. "I don't have an opinion." Liam didn't believe her. He could sense when someone was deflecting, and Sophia was deflecting hard. He just didn't know why. Not yet. Liam let the silence stretch between them, his sharp gaze never leaving her face. Most people cracked under the weight of his scrutiny, fidgeting or over-explaining. Sophia did neither. Instead, she held his stare for a beat too long, a quiet challenge. Then, without another word, she stepped back and turned toward the next table, smoothly transitioning into her routine as if their exchange had never happened. Liam watched her go, the ghost of a smirk lingering on his lips. She was hiding something, and he was going to find out what it was. Across the restaurant, Jessica shot Sophia a knowing look as she returned to the server's station. "So?" she pressed, nudging her playfully. "What's the verdict? Charming billionaire or insufferable playboy?" Sophia exhaled, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve. "Neither." Jessica scoffed. "Come on. The way he was looking at you, that man is used to getting exactly what he wants, and right now, he wants you." Sophia ignored her, reaching for another order slip. Jessica wasn't wrong. Liam Carter wasn't just watching her. He was studying her, reading between the lines of what she wasn't saying, and that was the problem. Sophia had spent years making herself invisible. She had worked hard to become just another face in the crowd, another nameless server people barely noticed. It was safer that way. And now Liam Carter had noticed her. That was dangerous. "Sophia," Jessica's voice softened. "Is this about—" "No." Sophia cut her off quickly. "It's nothing." Jessica didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she sighed dramatically. "Fine, keep your secrets. But if Mr. Carter asks you on a date, you better say yes, because if you don't, I will." Sophia huffed a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Be my guest." But she knew Liam wasn't interested in Jessica. He was interested in her, and Sophia had a sinking feeling that ignoring him wasn't going to be enough. Later that night, as Sophia walked home through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, she checked her phone. One unread message. Unknown number. I don't believe in coincidences. Dinner tomorrow? She stopped in her tracks, her stomach twisting. She hadn't given him her number, which meant he had found it himself. Sophia clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the phone. Liam Carter wasn't going to let this go, and deep down, she wasn't sure if she wanted him to. Sophia stared at the message on her phone, her heart pounding harder than she cared to admit. She had been careful, so careful. She had built a life where no one looked too closely, where no one asked too many questions. Yet somehow, in less than 24 hours, Liam Carter had found her number. And he wanted dinner. Sophia inhaled slowly, forcing herself to think. She could ignore him, delete the message, pretend she had never seen it. But something told her Liam wouldn't take silence as an answer. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed a response. Sophia. You don't strike me as the type who believes in coincidences. The reply came almost instantly. Liam, I don't. That's why I'm asking. Was running into you fate or just bad luck? Sophia hesitated, then typed back. Sophia. Definitely bad luck. For you. A pause. Then, Liam. Then let's test it. Tomorrow. 7 p.m. The Blue Orchid. She exhaled through her nose. The Blue Orchid, of course. A Michelin-starred restaurant, elegant, expensive, the kind of place people like him went to. The kind of place she used to go to. Sophia clenched her jaw. Number she had left that world behind. Sophia. I don't date customers. Liam. Good thing I wasn't asking for a date then. She rolled her eyes, but despite herself, a smirk tugged at her lips. Damn him. A few moments passed, and then another message popped up. Liam. Meet me anyway. And against every ounce of logic, Sophia found herself wanting to say yes. She typed back one word. Sophia. Fine. And just like that, the game had begun. The next evening, Sophia stood outside the Blue Orchid, staring at the soft golden glow coming from the restaurant's arched windows. Inside, elegantly dressed guests sipped wine and dined under chandeliers that shimmered like stardust. She hadn't stepped into a place like this in years, not since her life had unraveled. She could still remember the nights she had sat at tables like these, her father speaking in hushed yet commanding tones about business deals, while her mother sipped champagne, perfectly poised. Back when she was Sophia Moreno, the daughter of a powerful man, not a waitress hiding from her past. Her grip tightened on the strap of her purse. This was a mistake. Just as she turned to leave, a voice stopped her. You're early. Sophia exhaled sharply before composing herself. She turned to see Liam Carter stepping out of a sleek black car, his tailored suit sharp against the dimming sky. You say that like you expected me to show up at all, she said, arching a brow. Liam smirked. I did. And if I hadn't, I would have found another way to get you to agree. The confidence in his voice sent a shiver up her spine. He wasn't arrogant in the way men with money usually were. He was assured, like someone who had never been denied anything. Sophia tilted her head. That sounds dangerously close to stalking, Carter. His smirk widened. Good thing you showed up then. Before she could come up with a retort, Liam gestured toward the entrance. Shall we? A part of her wanted to refuse, to turn on her heel and disappear into the city before she let herself get pulled into whatever this was. But instead, she squared her shoulders and followed him inside. The hostess greeted them with the kind of warmth reserved for VIPs, immediately leading them to a secluded corner booth. Private, intimate, no prying eyes. Liam let her slide into the seat first before sitting across from her, his sharp blue eyes gleaming with amusement. "You look uncomfortable," he noted as he picked up the menu. Sophia ignored the way his gaze lingered on her, not in an obvious way, but enough to make her skin prickle with awareness. "I'm fine," she said smoothly, though her fingers curled slightly against the tablecloth. "Are you?" He leaned back, watching her carefully. "Because something tells me you're more familiar with places like this than you let on." Sophia froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Liam to notice, and just long enough for her to realize that, no matter how careful she thought she was, Liam Carter was already starting to see through her. Sophia knew she had slipped, just for a second. But with a man like Liam Carter, a second was enough. She forced a smirk, reaching for the menu. "I didn't realize eating in a nice restaurant required a background check." Liam chuckled, but his eyes remained sharp. "It doesn't. But I'm good at recognizing when someone doesn't belong." He paused, letting the words settle. "Or when they do." Her fingers tensed against the menu, but she kept her face unreadable. "I'm a waitress, Liam. Places like this, they're not exactly part of my world." He didn't respond immediately, which was almost worse. Instead, he studied her, his gaze dipping slightly as if he were trying to fit the pieces together. Then, with a knowing smirk, he turned his attention back to the menu. "Then let's make it simple. What do you want to eat?" Sophia exhaled quietly, relieved that he hadn't pushed further. For now. She glanced at the menu, scanning through the familiar dishes. It was strange. There was a time when she never had to look at prices, when 5-course meals were a normal part of life. Now, the mere sight of these dishes felt like looking into another world. "I'll have the filet mignon," she said, keeping her voice casual. Liam raised a brow. "Good choice. Medium rare?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Liam didn't react, but there was something in his eyes, something that told her he had caught the hesitation. Damn it! The waiter appeared, and Liam ordered for both of them. The moment the server walked away, he leaned forward slightly. "So, Sophia, tell me something." She lifted a brow. "You first." His lips twitched in amusement. "All right. What do you want to know?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Why me?" Liam tilted his head. "That's an interesting question." "I think it's a fair one," Sophia countered. "You don't seem like the kind of man who wastes time." "I don't." He studied her again, as if weighing his words. "Maybe I like a challenge." Sophia scoffed. "So, this is a game to you?" "Not a game," Liam said, his voice smooth. "A puzzle." Something flickered in her chest, a mix of unease and curiosity. Because the truth was, Liam Carter wasn't the only one trying to put together a puzzle, and she had a feeling that neither of them would like what they found. Sophia leaned back in her chair, arms crossed lightly as she studied him. A puzzle. The way he said it made her feel like he had already decided to figure her out, like she was some enigma waiting to be solved. She hated that feeling, because once, a long time ago, she had been part of his world, and now she was just a waitress who pretended none of it had ever existed. She took a slow sip of water before responding. "I hope you're not expecting me to make it easy for you." Liam smirked. "I'd be disappointed if you did." Before she could reply, the waiter returned, placing their plates in front of them. Sophia inhaled deeply, letting the rich scent of the perfectly cooked steak ground her. "Tell me, Liam," she said, cutting into her filet mignon. "Are you always this persistent?" Liam's smirk didn't fade as he took a bite of his food. "Only when something, or someone, interests me." Sophia rolled her eyes, but she couldn't ignore the way her pulse kicked up a notch. She wasn't used to being pursued. Not anymore. Liam wasn't like the customers who flirted with her out of boredom or the men who assumed a waitress was easy prey. He wasn't testing her. He was studying her, and that was infinitely more dangerous. "So what's your story, Sophia?" he asked, leaning back. "I know what you do, but not who you are." Her stomach twisted slightly, but she kept her voice neutral. "I think you already have a version of me in your head." "Maybe," Liam admitted, "but I'd rather hear the real one." She met his gaze, holding it. "Don't show weakness." "I moved here a few years ago. Needed a fresh start." Liam swirled his glass of wine. "From what?" Sophia smiled tightly. "That's the thing about fresh starts, Liam. You don't bring the past with you." Something flickered across his face. Not frustration, but curiosity. He knew she wasn't telling the whole truth, and she knew he wasn't going to let it go. But before Liam could push further, Sophia set down her fork and looked at him, her expression unreadable. "My turn." Liam gestured for her to continue, intrigued. Sophia rested her chin on her hand. "You built your company from the ground up, worked your way to the top. I respect that." Liam arched a brow. "That doesn't sound like a question." She tilted her head slightly. "It's not. The question is, do you ever regret it?" Liam's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. For the first time tonight, she had caught him off guard. And for the first time, Liam Carter didn't have an immediate answer. Sophia smirked slightly and picked up her wine glass, satisfied. Maybe he wasn't the only one playing this game after all. Liam didn't answer right away. Instead, he set his wine glass down carefully, his fingers tapping once against the stem before he looked back at Sophia. "Regret?" he echoed, as if testing the weight of the word. Sophia arched a brow. "That's the question." Liam exhaled, his smirk returning, though this time it lacked its usual easy arrogance. "You really don't like making things simple, do you?" She shrugged. "I think simplicity is overrated." For a moment, they sat in a quiet standoff. The restaurant hummed around them. Soft music, low conversations, the clinking of silverware against fine china. And yet, in their corner of the world, it felt like there was only the two of them. Finally, Liam leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "Regret is an interesting thing. Some people let it haunt them. Others pretend it doesn't exist." He tilted his head. "I prefer to learn from mine." Sophia studied him, searching for any cracks in the polished surface he presented to the world. "So, you're saying you do have regrets?" Liam didn't blink. "Don't you?" Sophia's grip tightened around her fork, but she forced a neutral expression. "I don't believe in looking back." Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "You're an awful liar." The words should have annoyed her, but instead they sent a small shiver down her spine. Because he wasn't wrong. Before she could come up with a response, Liam's phone buzzed on the table. He ignored it at first, but when it buzzed again, Sophia caught the name flashing on the screen before he flipped it over. Ethan Parker. Sophia kept her expression smooth, but something about the name stirred something deep in her memory. She had heard it before, and not just from the business magazines she had skimmed at work. Something about Ethan Parker and his connection to Liam felt familiar. She wasn't sure why, but she knew one thing. It wasn't a coincidence. Liam's phone buzzed again, but this time he silenced it completely. His eyes remained locked on Sophia, as if he could sense the subtle shift in her demeanor. "Something wrong?" he asked smoothly, his voice laced with casual curiosity. Sophia forced a small smile, shaking her head. "Number just thinking." She reached for her wine glass, hoping the movement would hide the sudden tension in her fingers. Ethan Parker. The name pulled at something buried deep, something she wasn't ready to unravel. Not here, not now. Liam studied her, his gaze knowing. "Thinking about me?" She huffed a quiet laugh. "You wish." But even as she spoke, her mind was racing. Why did that name feel like a warning? She needed to be careful. She had spent years keeping herself hidden, making sure no one from her past could find her. If Liam Carter and Ethan Parker were connected in ways she hadn't realized, it meant her world and his were closer than she ever intended them to be. She couldn't let that happen. "I should go," Sophia said suddenly, setting her glass down. Liam's brows lifted slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. If anything, he looked intrigued. "Running away?" Sophia rolled her eyes, reaching for her bag. "I prefer to call it leaving on my own terms." Liam leaned back, watching her with an unreadable expression. "All right, Sophia. But you should know something." She paused, glancing at him warily. "What's that?" He smirked. "I don't give up easily." Her pulse quickened, but she masked it with a slow exhale. "Neither do I." With that, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her steps steady, her expression calm. But inside, her mind was spinning. Because now she wasn't just avoiding Liam Carter, she was avoiding whatever connection he had to her past. And she had a feeling this was only the beginning. Sophia walked briskly through the city streets, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She should have felt relieved to have left the restaurant, to have put some distance between herself and Liam Carter. But she wasn't relieved. If anything, she felt like she had just walked straight into a trap, one she hadn't even seen coming. Ethan Parker. The name refused to leave her mind. She had spent years carefully constructing this life, a life where no one from her past could find her. And yet somehow, in the span of just a few days, Liam Carter had unknowingly started tearing it apart. Sophia turned a sharp corner and reached her apartment building, her pulse quickening as she entered the lobby. She kept her head down, moving quickly past the doorman before stepping into the elevator. As soon as the doors slid shut, she let out a slow breath. She had to be overthinking this. Ethan Parker was one of the most well-known names in business. Just because she recognized him didn't mean he recognized her. Just because he was connected to Liam didn't mean... Ding! The elevator doors opened, and Sophia stepped out, walking down the dimly lit hallway to her apartment. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. She barely had time to set her purse down before her phone vibrated on the counter. A message from an unknown number. Her stomach clenched as she hesitated, then slowly reached for the phone. Unknown number. You shouldn't have met with him. Sophia's breath hitched. The phone almost slipped from her fingers. Her eyes darted around her empty apartment, suddenly feeling too exposed, too vulnerable. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. Then, with steady fingers, she typed a response. "Sophia, who is this?" A few seconds passed. Then, unknown number. Stay away from Liam Carter. A shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew exactly who she was, and worse, they were watching. Sophia's fingers hovered over the screen, her mind racing. Whoever this was, they knew she had met with Liam. They knew enough about her past to send a warning. But why? She forced herself to take a breath. Panicking wouldn't help. She needed to be smart. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to delete the message and pretend it never came. But that wasn't an option. Not this time. Her second instinct was to fight back. Sophia, if you have something to say, say it. Hiding behind a blocked number isn't very convincing. She waited. 1 second. 2. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs. Whoever it was, they were hesitating, which meant they wanted to scare her, but they didn't expect her to push back. Finally, a reply came through. Unknown number. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Stay out of his life. You've been warned. Sophia exhaled slowly, setting the phone down before she crushed it in her grip. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Someone was trying to control her, to push her away from Liam. And the worst part? It was working. Because now she wasn't just worried about Liam finding out the truth about her past. She was worried about who else might already know. Sophia ran a hand through her hair, pacing the small space of her apartment. She could ignore the message, pretend it didn't mean anything. Or she could take it as a sign to walk away from Liam now, before things got worse. The thought made her chest tighten in a way she didn't like. Her phone buzzed again, and she nearly jumped. But this time, it wasn't from the unknown number. Liam Carter. Still thinking about me? Sophia let out a small, bitter laugh. If only he knew. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then, against all logic, she typed back, Sophia, you wish. And just like that, she made her choice. She wasn't walking away. Not yet. The wedding was perfect. At least it was supposed to be. The grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel shimmered under the warm glow of golden chandeliers. Crisp white floral arrangements lined the aisles, and the soft hum of classical music played from a string quartet tucked near the altar. Guests whispered in hushed admiration, their eyes fixed on the elegant scene before them. Everything was immaculate, every detail painstakingly planned. It was the kind of wedding that belonged in magazines, the kind of event the city's elite would talk about for years. But Sophia couldn't breathe. She stood at the entrance of the ballroom, the weight of her wedding gown pressing down on her shoulders. Her fingers trembled as they gripped the bouquet of ivory roses. Her heart pounded so violently against her ribcage that she thought it might shatter. This wasn't stage fright. This was something worse. She scanned the sea of guests, their faces blurred together, indistinct. Except for one. Near the back of the room, her father, Miguel Moreno, stood frozen in place. His normally confident posture was rigid, his face pale. Next to him, her mother, Elena, had one hand clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Sophia's stomach turned to ice. They hadn't been supposed to come. She had invited them out of obligation, never expecting them to actually show. They had spent years pretending she no longer existed, and she had learned to return the favor. But now they were here. And judging by the way they were staring at the man standing at the altar, her soon-to-be husband, she knew something was very, very wrong. Sophia sucked in a breath, her vision spinning. Number not here. Not now. She forced herself to look at Liam. He stood at the front of the aisle, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, his confident stance radiating power. His gaze was locked on her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held something soft, expectant. He had no idea what was coming. Sophia swallowed hard. She could do this. She could walk down that aisle, smile for the cameras, say the vows, and bury the past where it belonged. But then, just as she took a step forward, her father's voice cut through the silence, a voice that stopped everything. "Sophia," Miguel choked out, "you can't marry him." Gasps rippled through the guests. Liam's expression darkened. "Excuse me?" The room fell into a thick, terrifying silence. Sophia's world began to collapse. Every pair of eyes in the ballroom was now locked onto her. Sophia stood frozen at the entrance, her breath shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had expected this day to be difficult, to stand before the city's elite, marrying a man who, against all odds, had cracked through the walls she had spent years building. But she hadn't expected this. She turned slowly, her gaze landing on her father. Miguel Moreno was a man who rarely showed emotion, but tonight his expression was raw with something close to desperation. Her mother, Elena, clutched his arm, her knuckles white, as if willing him to stop talking, but it was too late. The words had already been spoken. Liam's voice was calm, but edged with warning. "I think you should explain." Miguel didn't look at Liam. He looked only at Sophia. "Sophia," he said again, his voice thick, "you don't know who you're marrying." A cold wave of nausea rolled through her. "Dad, don't!" "He's the reason we lost everything." The ballroom erupted. Murmurs surged through the crowd, heads turning, whispers passing like wildfire. Some guests exchanged confused glances, while others, those who knew the history of the Moreno family's fall from grace, stared in wide-eyed shock. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment would come, had always feared that one day her past and present would collide in the most catastrophic way. But she had never imagined it would happen like this. At her wedding, Liam's face remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered with something sharp, something dangerous. "I think you're mistaken," he said, his voice controlled but steel-hard. Miguel laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Mistaken?" His gaze flicked between them. "You don't even recognize me, do you?" Liam's brows furrowed, his sharp mind clearly trying to place the memory. Sophia knew the second it hit him. She saw it in the way his posture stiffened, in the way his fingers curled at his sides, in the way his jaw locked as realization set in. Because he did remember, and suddenly everything made sense. Sophia's presence in his life, her reluctance, her hesitation, the way she never let herself get too close. She wasn't just some waitress with a mysterious past. She was the daughter of the man whose business empire had crumbled in the wake of his success. The weight of the truth pressed down on her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. And in that moment, she knew. There was no turning back now. The silence that followed was suffocating. Liam's eyes were locked onto her, searching, demanding answers she couldn't give. Not here. Not now. Sophia's grip tightened around the bouquet in her hands. Her lungs burned, every breath shallow, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run. But where? There was nowhere to go. Not when the walls she had carefully built were crumbling all around her. Miguel took a step forward, his voice raw with years of resentment. "Tell me, Liam, how does it feel to stand there, about to marry the daughter of the man whose life you ruined?" Liam didn't flinch. His face remained unreadable, his posture steady, but his silence spoke louder than words. He knew. He remembered. And Sophia realized, with a sick twist in her stomach, that he had never connected the pieces before now. This wasn't some twisted revenge plot. He hadn't known who she was. He hadn't pursued her out of guilt. But none of that mattered anymore. because now he did know, and everyone else did too. The whispers in the room turned into a low hum of speculation. Reporters, because of course there were reporters, were already scribbling notes, their lenses zooming in, capturing the moment in real time. Sophia could see it now. The headlines. Billionaire groom exposed at the altar. The secret past of Sophia Moreno. Scandal erupts at Liam Carter's wedding. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about him, too. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, the thought of Liam being dragged down with her made her stomach twist with something close to panic. She needed to fix this. Fast. Sophia forced herself to speak, even though her voice felt like it was being squeezed from her lungs. "Dad," she said sharply, her eyes flashing with warning. "This isn't the time." Miguel let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, I think it's exactly the time." Her mother, Elena, placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Miguel, please." "No." Miguel's voice cracked, his gaze burning into Sophia's. "You were never supposed to be with him. You were never supposed to love him." The words sent a sharp, piercing pain through her chest. Sophia had spent years convincing herself that she could keep her past and present separate, that if she kept her heart locked away, the truth would never catch up to her. But it had, and now she had a choice to make. Sophia swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the bouquet until the stems dug into her palm. Her father's words echoed in her head, but she couldn't let them take root. Because this wasn't just about Miguel Moreno's hatred for Liam Carter. This was about her, and what she wanted. Her eyes flicked to Liam. He stood motionless, his expression carefully controlled, but she knew him well enough to see the storm brewing beneath the surface. His mind was working, calculating, trying to piece together what this meant. For them, for their future, for everything. Sophia knew she had seconds before the situation spiraled out of control, so she did the only thing she could think of. She turned to the crowd and took a step forward. "I know this isn't what any of you expected," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But since the truth is already out, let's set the record straight." The murmurs died down as all eyes snapped back to her. Sophia's heart pounded. This was it, the moment she had been running from for years. She looked at Liam again, at the man she had come to love, the man she had been prepared to spend her life with, and she chose honesty. "I wasn't always a waitress," she admitted, her voice carrying through the ballroom. "I grew up in a world like this. Private jets, designer gowns, high society parties." She let out a bitter chuckle. "I thought it would last forever, but nothing does." She turned to her father, who stood rigid, his expression dark with betrayal. "My father lost everything," she continued, her voice gentler now. "And yes, Liam's company played a part in that. But it wasn't the only reason, and it wasn't the whole story." Miguel's face turned to stone. "Sophia, no." She lifted her chin, finding strength in the weight of her own truth. "You blame Liam because it's easier than facing the mistakes that were made. But I'm not going to live my life clinging to the past." Liam's breath hitched slightly, so quiet that no one else would have noticed. But she did, because this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs. Sophia turned back to him, meeting his gaze head-on. "I love you," she said, the words feeling like a weight lifted from her chest. "And nothing changes that." The room was dead silent, Liam's jaw clenched. His eyes burned into hers, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. And then, just as the tension reached its breaking point. He reached for her hand. Sophia barely had time to process the movement before he pulled her in, crashing his lips against hers. The crowd gasped. Flashes went off. But Sophia didn't care. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't running. She was finally standing still. And she had never felt freer. Sophia's pulse pounded in her ears as she took a shaky step back, her father's words ringing in her head. You were never supposed to love him, but she had. She had fallen for Liam Carter despite every warning, every instinct that told her to stay away. And now, in front of a room filled with powerful guests, journalists, and the man she had promised to marry, her secret was out. Liam's expression was unreadable, his jaw tight, his blue eyes locked onto hers, not with anger, not yet, but with something far worse. Betrayal. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He was waiting for her, for the truth. But what could she say? That she had always known who he was, that she had spent months burying the past, pretending she could build something real with him when deep down she had always feared this moment. That she had thought, hoped, he would never find out. The weight of it all crushed her. She turned to Miguel, desperation tightening in her throat. Dad, please don't do this. Her father's eyes were cold. He doesn't deserve you, Sophia. I can make that decision for myself. Miguel shook his head, his hands clenching at his sides. You're blinded. Do you even know what his company did to ours? His voice rose, raw and bitter. Do you know how much we lost? Sophia's stomach twisted. Yes, she whispered. I know. Liam's expression flickered, barely, but she caught it. He took a slow step forward. How long? His voice was quiet, but there was an edge beneath it. She swallowed hard. Liam, how long have you known who I was? The entire ballroom was silent. The answer hung heavy in the air between them. Sophia felt her breath shake. Since the beginning. A muscle in Liam's jaw ticked, but he didn't break eye contact. His next words, though controlled, cut through her like a blade. So this... He gestured between them, his voice lower now. Was it ever real? And just like that, the man she loved looked at her like she was a stranger. Sophia's chest tightened at the weight of his words. Was it ever real? She wanted to scream yes, to tell him that every moment between them had been realer than anything she had ever known. But with the way he was looking at her now, like she was just another person who had used him, who had deceived him, the words wouldn't come. Liam took another step forward, his presence overwhelming, his gaze sharp enough to slice through her defenses. So what was the plan, Sophia? His voice was dangerously calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. Were you waiting for the right moment to tell me? Or were you never going to? Sophia opened her mouth, but Miguel cut in before she could speak. She wasn't going to, her father said coldly. She knew exactly who you were from the start, Carter. You were nothing more than a reminder of what we lost. Liam's gaze flicked to Miguel, something dark flashing behind his eyes. You think I destroyed your company? His voice was low, controlled. You think I took everything from you? Miguel let out a bitter laugh. That's not up for debate. Liam didn't flinch. Then let's have that debate. Because as far as I remember, your downfall had nothing to do with me. Sophia's breath caught. This was it. This was what she had been afraid of. Because she knew. Liam wasn't entirely to blame. Her father's company hadn't failed because of some ruthless move on Liam's part. It had failed because of something else. something Miguel had never admitted. Liam took another step forward. You lost your company because of a bad deal, one that you agreed to, one that your own business partner, his voice sharpened, stabbed you in the back over. Miguel's face twisted with anger. You don't know anything about it. I know enough, Liam shot back. I know that blaming me is easier than accepting that the man you trusted, the man you built your company with, screwed you over the second he had the chance. Sophia's heart pounded. Liam was right. Her father's former business partner, Daniel Crestwell, had been the one to make the final blow, selling out their company's future for his own gain. And Miguel had let his own pride, his own bitterness, blind him from seeing it. Her hands trembled at her sides. Dad, she whispered. Is it true? Miguel's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. And in that silence, Sophia had her answer. The walls around her crashed down. She had spent years carrying this weight, believing that Liam had been the enemy, that he was the reason her world had collapsed. But now? Now she wasn't sure who the villain really was. Liam exhaled slowly, his gaze flicking between Miguel and Sophia, something unreadable in his expression. I think we're done here, he said, voice devoid of emotion. Sophia's heart lurched. No, she said quickly, stepping toward him. Liam, please. He flinched back, just slightly, just enough to make her chest ache. His jaw tensed, his voice quieter now. I don't even know who you are. The words shattered something inside her. And then, without another glance, Liam Carter turned and walked away. The whispers returned, the cameras flashed, and Sophia stood in the wreckage of her own making, watching the only man she had ever loved disappear from her life, possibly for good. Sophia felt the room closing in around her. The weight of everyone's eyes burned into her skin. Guests whispering, journalists scribbling notes, cameras discreetly capturing every tense moment. But none of it mattered. Not when Liam was standing in front of her, his expression unreadable, his voice eerily calm. Was it ever real? The words echoed in her chest like a hammer against glass. Sophia opened her mouth, desperate to speak, to explain, to tell him that despite everything, yes, it was real. But before she could, Miguel stepped forward. She was protecting herself, he said, voice firm. Protecting our family from you. Liam barely spared him a glance. His focus remained solely on her. Sophia shook her head. No. From me? Liam finally turned to Miguel, his voice laced with disbelief. You think I ruined you? Miguel's face twisted with anger. You know exactly what your company did to mine. Liam exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I don't know what fantasy you've created in your head, but I didn't destroy you, Moreno. Business is brutal, and the market decides who survives. If your company failed, that's on you. Miguel's fists clenched, but Liam wasn't finished. He looked back at Sophia, and his next words made her stomach drop. But now I have to wonder. His voice was quiet, but the disappointment cut through her like ice. Was this your plan all along? Sophia's breath caught. Liam, no. Did you get close to me for them? His gaze flicked to her parents before returning to her, sharp and accusing. Or was it for revenge? The sheer hurt in his voice sent a crack through her heart. No, she whispered, stepping toward him. It was never like that. Liam didn't move. He just stared at her, waiting, searching for something she wasn't sure she could give him. And then, just as she reached for him, he took a step back. It felt like the end. The moment Liam stepped back, everything changed. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was a chasm, widening with every second of silence. Sophia could feel the weight of the stairs, the growing murmurs of the crowd, but all she could focus on was him. Liam, who had once looked at her like she was the one person in the world who truly mattered, now looked at her like he didn't know her at all. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, desperation clawing at her throat. "Liam, please," she whispered, voice unsteady. "I never lied about how I felt about you." Something flickered across his face. Doubt. Hope. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by something harder. His voice was quiet, but it sliced through her like a knife. "You lied about everything else." Sophia inhaled sharply. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Liam demanded, his composure slipping. For the first time tonight, the storm inside him showed. "Before or after you said I do? Or were you hoping I'd never find out?" "No, She shook her head, her voice cracking. "I didn't plan this, Liam. I didn't seek you out. I didn't even want to fall for you." His jaw clenched. "But you did." "Yes," she whispered, pleading for him to believe it. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like he did. But then Miguel spoke again. "She's better off without you." Liam's gaze flicked to Sophia's father, and something inside him snapped. He let out a cold, bitter laugh and shook his head. "You know what? Maybe you're right." Sophia felt the ground drop beneath her. "Liam." His voice was calm, but his words were devastating. "We're done." The air left her lungs. She took a step forward, but he was already turning, already walking away, out of the ballroom, out of her life. And this time, she didn't know if he would ever come back. The days after the wedding felt like a blur. Sophia had expected the headlines, but seeing them splashed across every major news outlet still made her stomach twist. "Billionaire groom walks away at the altar, the secret that changed everything." Sophia Moreno, the woman who hid her past from Liam Carter. Scandal, betrayal, and a wedding that never was. It didn't matter that she had stayed out of the spotlight for years. Now everyone knew her name. And worse, Liam hadn't reached out. Not a call, not a message, not even a sign that he had thought about her since walking out of that ballroom. She had broken him, and it destroyed her. Jessica had begged her to take some time off work, but Sophia refused. She needed the distraction. Anything was better than sitting alone in her apartment, replaying that night over and over again. But even as she tried to move forward, she couldn't escape him. Everywhere she went, Liam was there. Not physically, but in the conversations whispered around her, in the magazine covers that stared back at her from every corner store, in the aching hollowness inside her chest. She had lost him. And the worst part? She wasn't sure if she deserved to get him back. But then, just when she thought it was over, when she thought Liam had erased her from his life for good, her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest told her she had to. She hesitated, then picked up. A familiar voice greeted her, but it wasn't Liam. It was Ethan Parker, and his words made her blood turn to ice. "You need to see him, Sophia," he said, his tone grim. "Before it's too late." Sophia's breath hitched. She gripped the phone tighter, pulse pounding. "What do you mean, before it's too late?" On the other end of the line, Ethan Parker sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. "He's spiraling, Sophia. Ever since the wedding." He trailed off, as if debating whether to say more. Sophia's stomach twisted. She didn't need him to finish. She could imagine it already. Liam throwing himself into work, burying his pain in deals, acquisitions, and late-night meetings. He was the type who wouldn't let the world see him break. But that didn't mean he wasn't breaking. And she was the one who had pushed him over the edge. Sophia swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Ethan said, "like it or not, you're the only person who can pull him out of it." She let out a bitter laugh. "He doesn't want to see me, Ethan. He made that pretty clear." There was a pause. Then, "He thinks he doesn't." Sophia's chest tightened. "I know Liam," Ethan continued. "He's angry. He feels betrayed. But that's not the real problem." "Then what is?" Ethan's voice softened, turning serious. "He's hurt, Sophia, and that's not something he knows how to handle." The words sent a sharp ache through her. She had seen glimpses of that part of him. The man behind the power, behind the billions. The one who had looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd ever had. And she had broken him. Sophia shut her eyes, forcing back the sting of guilt. "What do you want me to do?" "Meet him," Ethan said simply. "Talk to him. If you're really done, if you really think you should walk away, then tell him that. To his face." She hesitated, because the truth was, she didn't want to walk away, but she didn't know if Liam would even listen. Still, something inside her whispered that she had to try. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice quiet. Ethan didn't hesitate. "His penthouse." Sophia nodded, already reaching for her coat. She didn't know what she was going to say. She didn't know if there was anything left to save. But she had to see him. Because if there was even the smallest chance that she could fix this, she had to take it. Sophia stood outside Liam's penthouse, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he'd hear it through the door. She had rehearsed what she would say a dozen times on the drive here. But now, standing in front of him again, everything felt different. What if he wouldn't listen? What if she had already lost him? The thought was unbearable. Before she could talk herself out of it, she raised a trembling fist and knocked. For a moment, nothing. Then, the door swung open. And there he was. Liam Carter stood before her, not the polished, untouchable businessman the world knew, but a man who had been unraveled. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, and there was a weariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The sight of him like this, raw, unguarded, tired, made something in Sophia's chest tighten. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, as if unsure if she was real. Finally, his voice came, hoarse and quiet. "What are you doing here?" Sophia swallowed hard. "Ethan called me." Liam exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Of course he did." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I told him I didn't need anyone fixing things for me." "I'm not here because of Ethan," she said quickly. "I'm here because of you." His jaw tightened. "Why?" The question hung heavy between them. She could lie. She could tell him she just wanted closure, that she was here to make peace before walking away for good. But he deserved the truth. "I love you, Liam," she said softly. "I never lied about that." His body tensed, as if bracing for impact, but he didn't speak. Sophia took a shaky breath. "I should have told you everything sooner. I was scared of what you'd think, scared of losing you. But the truth is, I lost you anyway, didn't I?" Liam's expression flickered, but he still didn't move. Sophia felt her throat tighten. "If you never want to see me again, I'll walk away. But I had to tell you that none of it was fake. Not for me." Silence. Seconds stretched like an eternity. And then just as she was about to turn away, Liam moved, He stepped forward, slowly, hesitantly, until he was right in front of her. His eyes searched hers, as if looking for something real amidst all the pain. And then, softly, carefully, he reached for her hand. Sophia's breath caught. She wasn't sure if this was forgiveness, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Sophia stood in front of Liam's penthouse, her pulse hammering as she lifted her hand to knock. For a brief second, doubt crept in. What if he didn't want to see her? What if she was already too late? She almost turned around, almost let her pride and her fear win. But then the door swung open, and there he was, Liam Carter, disheveled, exhausted, and yet still devastatingly himself. His normally sharp suit had been replaced with dark sweatpants and a loose black t-shirt. His hair slightly tousled as if he had been running his hands through it all night. There was a hint of stubble on his jaw, and his blue eyes, once so full of fire, looked tired. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked like a man who had lost. Sophia's chest ached. Liam stared at her, silent. Then finally, "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, rough around the edges, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. Sophia swallowed. "I needed to see you." A humorless chuckle left his lips. "Why?" His gaze darkened. "To explain? To justify it all?" She shook her head. "Number, to tell you the truth." Liam exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his face. "Sophia, I never wanted to hurt you," she said, stepping forward, closing the space between them. "I never planned any of this. And I never, not for a second, used you." He didn't move, didn't blink, but she could see the way his fingers curled into a fist at his side. He was listening. Sophia's throat tightened. "I knew who you were, from the beginning. But the second I got to know you, the second I saw you for who you really are, it wasn't about the past anymore." She took a shaky breath. "It was about you." Liam's jaw clenched. For the first time, his voice cracked. "And yet you still lied." She exhaled, her heart breaking. "Yes, and I regret it every single day." A long silence stretched between them. Liam studied her, his expression unreadable. "Do you love me?" Sophia's breath hitched, and then, without hesitation, "Yes," she whispered. "I love you." His chest rose and fell with a sharp inhale. Sophia swallowed past the lump in her throat. "But if you can't forgive me, if you need me to walk away, I will." She took another step closer, so close she could almost touch him. "Just tell me, right now. If you're done, say the word, and I swear I'll go." Liam didn't answer. He just stared at her. And for a terrifying moment, she thought she had lost him forever.